Again, we're going to get started and get the afternoon rolling. Excellent. Okay. And we're going to start with another prize drawing. And we have Jordan Edwards. All right, Jordan. All right, I'm going to introduce Lynn Gilpatrick, who is going to then introduce our next speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good lunch and that you're feeling refreshed. My name is Lynn Gilpatrick. I have Usher Touré. I'm originally from Rhode Island and Massachusetts. About 4 years ago, my family and I moved down to Florida, and I am now co-ambassador for the state of Florida. I have a master's degree in social work, and I've worked in early intervention for 25 years, so I have experience working with children with developmental delays and their families, and I've experienced transitioning them from early intervention into the school systems. And I'm really excited and I'm really honored to introduce you to Lanya McKittrick. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lanya McKittrick. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you for the warm welcome. Just a little bit of background about myself if you don't know me. You met my son Connor this morning. He introduced Dr. Boy, and him and my younger son Dalton are really why I'm here and why I do this. So I'm a special education researcher. Because of my experiences as a parent, first and foremost, I went back to school and became a special education researcher. I specialize in family research, specific to deafblindness. And what's really important to me is how do we work together to serve the kids in this population? And so, I know that I would not be where I am today if it weren't for the great educational teams that kind of came together with me in order to support my kids to be able to do and be where they're at. Connor mentioned this morning that he's going to graduate school next month, and it's really because of this team effort that everybody came together. And so it's really my goal to figure out how to help families identify the challenges that other families have experienced so that we really can build those relationships with school teams and get the unique needs and individualized needs met. I have a nonprofit called Lane of Inquiry where I do educational research specific to deafblindness, and I also support families along the way. So I don't have very much time today to cover this topic, so if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to help you. Yesterday, my colleague Edgenie Bellah with the Texas Deafblind Project and myself did a family workshop, which was great and well attended, where we talked about some of these issues. So for those of you who attended yesterday, thank you, and hopefully this is just a nice review of what we talked about. So, I mentioned my research. I think it's really important because of, we need to collaborate together to understand some of the challenges that parents have experienced. So in my research, I've talked to many, many families about what do they experience when they meet with the education teams. And because Usher syndrome is so rare, often educators have never met a child who has Usher syndrome, and so they need to be educated on what those needs are. And professionals misunderstand those needs, not because they don't want to understand, but just because they've never met a child who has Usher syndrome or potentially is deafblind at all. And so what that forces parents to do is to really push for services and supports because the parents know their children the best. Parents also have let me know that it's really important to foster student self-advocacy. So how do you work with students at a young age to be able to self-advocate for themselves? And that's something that I believe can be started at a very young age because students can be able to identify what their needs are better than anyone else. And so how do we support them in order to be able to build those self-advocacy skills? Also, it's really important for families to have access to other families. I know I've been doing this for about 20 years, but still there are times when I'm meeting with an education team and I don't have the answer for something. And so it's this community of Usher families that I rely on constantly. There's still times when I'm trying to problem solve something and I need to reach out to another family. So that's why this community is so important. Also families, we talked about yesterday with Rebecca's presentation, all the emotional impacts that families have. There's the grief cycle, so many other things that are going on. And it's important for educators and teams that are working with families to understand what families might be going through. And as we mentioned yesterday in Rebecca's presentation, it impacts the entire family. So not just the parents or the individual with Usher syndrome, but the entire family is likely there supporting everyone that has, to make sure that they have what they need in the support system. Some other things that parents have reported that unfortunately sometimes teams don't understand and value different communication modes. And I find that this is often the case, especially when we're trying to find a preschool for a child. A school district may have a preschool that has an oral deaf program, but not, the family may have chosen ASL as the communication mode. And so, a school district may try to force that family into a program that just isn't the right fit. And so, it can be really, really frustrating for a family to have a team not understand what the family's chosen communication mode is. Also, because you have vision loss, hearing loss, balance, sometimes other disabilities, there's a large team of service providers that are supporting the family and the child. And so that requires an enormous amount of collaboration, not just with the family, but also between team members. So if the teacher of the deaf is working with the child and the teacher of the visually impaired is working with a child, if they're not on the same page and working together, it can be a real challenge. The other thing is transitions. And when I think about transition, oftentimes you're thinking about when a child turns the age of 16 and gets ready for whatever's after high school. But there's so many other transitions that are important. So the transition, for instance, from into preschool, you're moving different schools, maybe going into the school system. Then you're moving into kindergarten, which is a whole nother ball game. You're maybe potentially moving into middle school, high school. But some of the other transitions that are very important too are each year you're starting with a new teacher. So that's a whole nother transition. Sometimes even having a substitute in the classroom is a transition and it's going to interrupt the progress of a student. And so you need to have plans in place in order to address how you're going to address transitions. And there's always constantly changing needs and environments. So, I know that if my kids have been tired, they're stressed, something's going on at home, so many other things. With the pandemic, you can see all of the impacts. And so it's constantly changing. And the vision, it's a progressive vision and hearing loss. And so, what may have worked yesterday may not work today for that child. And so being really, really willing to problem solve, can constantly be flexible and make changes in what worked yesterday in order to make sure that we continually are making sure that we have the appropriate supports in place. So what does this look like in the classroom? I think it's important, like I said, that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is called an individualized education program for a reason. However, it's not always the case. Because Usher syndrome is so rare, the team may not know. And so, or they may have had another child with Usher syndrome in the district or know somebody and say, well, this is what we did for this child. I'm sure this is gonna work for your child as well. But that's not gonna be the case, because we all know that we're all different and we all have different needs. So one other thing in the classroom that is really big is seating. So when you think about it, when you think about just the hearing side of things, it might be appropriate for the student to be close to the interpreter, or if they are using hearing aids or a hearing device, they may want to be in the middle of the classroom so that they can hear their peers better. From the vision perspective, the teacher of the visually impaired might come in and say, well, that child should be in the front of the classroom, close to the board, close to the teacher. Well, those two things are at odds. And so, finding a balance and trying new things and seeing which seat in the classroom is gonna work best. And so that, again, you can see how that would really help to have a collaborative environment to be able to brainstorm and problem solve. And also, checking for understanding, because I see a lot of educators coming and just asking students, hey, do you understand what's going on? Well, instead, the students don't know if they've missed something in the classroom. So if you just ask them, well, did you understand what I said? They're gonna say, well, yeah, I understood. But really what you should be doing is talking with that student and say, okay, can you repeat back to me what your homework assignment is, for instance? And if they can't repeat that back, you know that they actually have missed something and you need to, repeat that, go over it with them, and make sure that they're following along. Auditory and visual fatigue is huge, because at the end of the day, the kids are working really hard to access, everything that's going on in the classroom. And I find in the last couple years with the pandemic, it's even worse, because we're all tired, we're stressed, lots of things going on. And so for our kids, that is a real big thing. And also I find that it gets worse as the year goes on. The year starts really great, then you get hit like Christmas break, and great, I'm gonna have a couple weeks off, and then January rolls around and the kids are just exhausted. So it's really important, because of this, is to always constantly be evaluating what's working and what needs to get adjusted. Through all of this, you can see how communication is vital, because parents may see something different at home than what's happening at school, and vice versa. And if you're not communicating, it may take longer to be able to resolve anything that's going on. The other thing is balancing services and needs, because I've heard this a lot from families, like yesterday, talking about, when do I start Braille? When do I start cane training? There's all of these things. And so if you're trying to do everything all at the same time, it can be really overwhelming. And so how do you balance all of those things so that you as parents are not overwhelmed, you make it the best experience for the child, and still really thinking about how to fit it all in? So there's no right or wrong answer, but it really is a challenging balancing act. Through all of this, accommodations are absolutely vital. I'm not gonna get into a lot of it, but if you have the appropriate accommodations in place, if you have extra time on tests, if you have pre-teaching of concepts, you're able to use audiobooks or what have you in order to access the curriculum, you can do amazing things, but you need to make sure that you have these accommodations and supports in place. So what can you do about it? How can you make this a positive experience and collaborative in order to get your child's needs met? Well, the first thing is really important is to ensure that somebody with deafblind experience is on your team, because often you have somebody who understands the hearing loss really well, understands the vision loss, but they may not understand the impact of both together. So you can reach out to I work for a Deafblind Project. Each state has one. My colleague Edgenie works in Texas on a Deafblind Project. So there's people out there in organizations that can come and help you supplement and make sure that somebody who understands deafblindness is there with you along the way. It's also important for families to communicate. I mentioned earlier that you really need to have the team understand what's going on both at home and at school. And so that takes really, really good communication. And it's really the key to collaboration and everything, is that comes down to that collaboration. And understanding that it's not just deafness and blindness, but the combination of those two things in the classroom can make a really big impact on a child. And that's why it's important to have somebody who understands deafblindness and Usher syndrome on the team. And so oftentimes families also, in order to help with all of this, they facilitate an in-service about deafblindness or Usher syndrome. So they will talk with the team, and for instance, for my younger son, we put together a narrated PowerPoint about, here's what Usher syndrome is, here's what my hearing loss is, here's what my vision loss, here's what this looks like. And he provides it to all of his teachers that are going to be meeting with him, and we send it to them before the beginning of the school year. So, and it's not just about the hearing loss and the vision loss. It's like, okay, I'm a black belt in Taekwondo. Here's what I like to do. Here's what works for me. Here's about me as a person. And it can be really effective, because at the beginning of the school year, if that transition doesn't go well, it can be a real challenge to be able to get all of those supports in place. And so if the team knows about Usher syndrome and deafblindness and the needs about that particular child, it can really help. And it's important to understand that we need to have appropriate goals. I have one comment that I heard from a parent, and one of the team members told her, honors classes are just not appropriate for children like yours. And it's heartbreaking. But these are stories that happen. And I know that anything's possible. My son's going to graduate school. He's very smart. And so things like that, like kids know, and it's how do you make sure that the goals that are on an education plan are, really, they're high enough that they're achievable, yet it stretches them to be what they can be. It's also important to help students, like I mentioned, be strong self-advocates. So I know that there have been several instances where my son can really better self-advocate for his needs than I can. We've had some times when there's conflict on teams, and he was able to identify and describe what's going on and get the services and support he needed better than I could, honestly. You are an important player on the team. You aren't just sitting in the meeting. You are critical, vital. You know your child better than anyone else. And so it's just important to really remember that. And lastly, I'm going to leave you with this. It's important to help the team think about current and future needs. And so that's where I get this, where's your North Star? A lot of times, school teams are just focused on today. And it's important, you do have to balance this, but I think it's very important to think as a family, what does 10 years out look? What is 20 years out? Do I want my child to go to college? Do I want them to live independently? And what is it going to take to get from today to there? Because you need to be able to map that back. I remember when my son Connor was doing his transition IEP, and he looked at his IEP goals and he said, well, no, I want to go to college. I want to do these things. And these goals that you have in place today are not going to get me there. And so that was an eye-opening experience. And I think involving the child in this process and talking about what is your North Star? What are you wanting to accomplish? It can be changed every day. But just continually thinking about what are your dreams for your child? What is your vision? And working, step by step to get there. And, like you saw this morning, it's possible. Anything is possible. It just takes an enormous amount of work, and it takes a large team of people collaborating together to make it possible. And I'm really lucky that we had great teams in place to make that possible. It's not to say that we didn't have challenges, but, I think these relationships and building this and working together can really make a difference. So thank you so much. I have so many more resources on my website, or feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all. And sorry, interpreters, I know I talked fast. Thank you.